Actually, I'm glad that you got that education and that you met all those people and that you lived in different places because it gives you a broad range of experience to draw on rather than tunnel vision. I'm hoping that it helps you see the big picture.
Well, and I hope it does too, and certainly all of us can see a bigger picture. But I'm fortunate. I grew up here in central Iowa. Um, Thought probably a little more than I wanted to hurry to get out of central Iowa at some point in my life. Lived in Chicago, lived in New Orleans. Very much enjoyed both experiences, and realized that there were things in central Iowa that are uniquely central Iowa. Safe streets and safe communities, um, good standard of living, good schools, and that certainly brought me back to this area. I was fortunate enough to have a greater appreciation coming back to it than I would had I never left. But also, there are unique problems out there that are certainly stamped in central Iowa. Water quality is a great example, and I know kind of our topic today, but central Iowa, in particular, Iowa more generally, has one of the worst water qualities. And I'm not talking about drinking water, I'm talking about surface water. You go out and look at the Des Moines River, the Raccoon River, the Skunk River, whatever it may be, the Missouri River, you can tell by looking at it that the water quality compared with what you'd see in Colorado or Idaho or Wisconsin, even as a neighboring state, or Minnesota, Iowa has some unique problems associated with our dependence on row crop farming, agriculture generally, and some of our stewardship opportunities that have gone awry. In Iowa, we tend to want to focus on getting water away from our businesses and our homes and our farms. And for those of us who lived in places that have a lot more water than this, Louisiana as an example, or on the other side of the scale, if you go west to where water really is a scarce commodity, you recognize that people value water more in communities compared with Iowa. We have a tendency to want to get rid of it, and because of that, there are a lot of pollutants, as we see by going and looking at any of the surface waters, or by talking with somebody who, example, treats water. If you were to talk with Randy Beavers, my counterpart from Des Moines Water Works, he'll tell you that they spend a lot of money cleaning water so that you and I can drink it. The natural state of water as it comes down, any of the surface waters here in Iowa, is horrible, and probably second to none in its poor quality, unless it would be like the state of Mississippi or something like that. Any of our uh, states immediately contiguous, even in Nebraska or Missouri, certainly Minnesota or Wisconsin, would have a lot better water quality than we have here in Iowa. So those kind of things are great problems to try and work with professionally for me on a day-to-day basis. I have had the benefit of being in a number of other communities, but this is my home and certainly a place that I feel very comfortable being in this period of my life, and hopefully with residents here, we can work together to improve the quality of life here in Iowa, which to a large degree really depends, I think, on improving water quality.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to go on and, well, I did want to ask you about the recent, I think it was the amendment about the Iowa Conservation Fund. Is that going to help us bring Iowa back to where it needs to be?
We certainly hope that that's a step in the right direction. One of the attributes of that, fortunately or unfortunately, is that the money doesn't even begin to come back into the fund until there is a future but not yet approved sales tax increase.
Okay.
It's really kind of a future directed. If there is a sales tax increase, and a portion of that will come back into the fund, that certainly helps. But in my view, the larger issue of water quality really goes to some of the assumptions that we as Iowans have depended on: row crop farming, how we use impervious surfaces here in cities like the one we're sitting in, instead of looking at a better stewardship for water. Certainly, small groups of money coming through the state are helpful. Here in Des Moines, we've received a lot of money over the last several years from both the federal government and state government for some water quality and water quantity protection issues. But at the end of the day, the deeper issue is probably more individual user related, and we need a significant change in how we as a community view water quality. We have a tendency, I think, to just assume that we should be stuck with rivers that look like Cappuccino instead of rivers that have better water quality. And I think probably the key to keeping people in my son's generation around here is to have recreational uses that certainly Wisconsin or Minnesota has that an Iowa doesn't. If I'm going to go out and use a kayak on surface waters here in central Iowa, reality is I'm going to come back and hose down my kayak and be pretty careful that when I get in the water that I'm not swallowing it. Obviously, if we're in Colorado or Idaho, water quality is a lot better and really attracts more recreational uses. So I think there are a lot of things that need to happen. Certainly things like small state initiatives to provide money for individual projects is helpful, but we've got a larger attitude change that I think needs to happen for most of us as Iowans to be able to really make this state as enjoyable as it should be.
So what do you think the individual can do to make things better?
Well, and I'm a great believer in thinking globally but acting locally, not to be too platitudinous about it, but the environment is a huge issue. I think that will continue to be an important issue for us as consumers. Things like bottled water probably are not the best use of our resources. Buying more crops locally makes a great deal of sense, in my view. Things like also buying produce locally. Farmers markets are a great thing, in my view. Using available recycling programs more with greater stewardship. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of good mass transit here. Hopefully over time that'll improve, but using the bus systems as an example to improve air quality I think is pretty important. And one of the things at my age that I find most important to remember is my yard doesn't have to look like a golf course. I don't have to put in 3 inches of Scott turf builder on it to make it work. We have a tendency as consumers to want things that, in my view, are not very resource careful. And when it comes to things like urban landscapes and golfing and other things that I think are really pretty rough on the environment, particularly as it relates to water quality, maybe we need to make some different choices in how we consume.
Okay, very good. I wanted to ask you where you're from.
I am from Story County, just to our north. I grew up in the city of Nevada, which is, for those of you who aren't familiar with Nevada, is probably not a city. It's the county seat outside of Ames. A great area to grow up in. I'm happy that I spent the first 18 years of my life there. I still have some family in the area and go up there on a regular basis. Great place to grow up. I'm now happier to be in a larger city, but it's certainly, I think back on good schools and good communities and supportive communities, and are very fortunate that I had that start, at least.
Okay. So are you still the director of the Iowa chapter of American Public Works Association?
I'm not. That's now a couple years behind me. That's usually an annual year in terms of tenure. It was the Iowa chapter of the American Public Works is really a group of people like me in each of the certainly in each of the major cities and some of the smaller communities that have a professional association. We get together a couple times a year to talk about infrastructure issues, water quality issues, air quality issues, stormwater management issues. And I had the benefit of serving as the president of the state association now, probably 2 years ago, maybe it was 3 years ago now. It's a fun group to be part of, and certainly an important group for the kind of networking that is important in moving Iowa forward and improving its infrastructure and improving our appreciation as really infrastructure professionals of environmental issues. Many of us were educated in how to build them and how to maintain them, and brick and mortar and concrete and asphalt kind of were the standard, certainly when I was in school. Now I think through these professional associations and a change in curriculum in the state universities and private universities and the engineering programs, there's a greater appreciation for environmentalism. I remember the first Earth Day. I was a part of it as an elementary student, but to take environmental experiences and build them into the professional engineering kind of world and infrastructure management world that I'm involved in really has been a slow evolution, and things like the Iowa chapter of the American Public Works really have kept a number of us more involved in really looking to environmental initiatives, not simply infrastructure initiatives.
Okay.